and welcome to Untamed, Unfiltered. I'm Amanda Nicholson.
My name is Aaron Provencio, and today we are joined by two guests, our licensed veterinary technician, Jessica Dyer, and of course our outreach educator, Lauren Edzenga. How's it going today, everybody?
Hey.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you guys for joining us for this episode, which is all about technology in wildlife medicine and education. So this was a really in-depth episode that kind of covered the full spectrum. So we knew we wanted to have two guests to kind of help us cover all of the things that are involved with technology. So from caring for the patients and figuring out what's going on and treating them to the whole education realm side of things. There's certainly a lot to talk about when we get into technology. So I think it is probably obvious to a lot of people what an LVT and an educator does, but why don't you guys give us a rough rundown of how you spend your time? What's your day-to-day like?
So, yes, like Amanda was saying, I'm a licensed veterinary technician at the Wildlife Center, and very similarly to like an LVT that, practices at a small animal clinic, I do a lot of the same things, and like my role is functionally pretty much the same. The only difference is that we see wildlife instead of domestic animals pretty much. And I help with the patients that are currently hospitalized, that are already in our care, as well as the patients that, come in on a day-to-day basis. So I help with the triage of new patients. So when they get their intake exams and radiographs, all that kind of stuff, I'm helping to restrain and, help perform the exams and the radiographs and take those initial diagnostics, as well as, help prep medications and daily treatments for the morning and the afternoon for all of our patients that are already in our care. Specifically, I guess, other things that I do, that are just kind of like routine day to day. I think that what I enjoy most about my day is that I don't really know a lot of time ahead of time, like what's happening on a given day, which is exciting. But I would say diagnostics makes up a huge component of my job. So I spend a lot of time in the lab running CBCs and fecal tests. And then I also perform a lot of radiographs on our patients. And I do a lot of like weird things. I'm just kind of like a jack of all trades. It's a lot like nursing. I would just compare my role basically to an animal nurse, essentially.
Awesome. I think a lot of us do weird thing, like everyone to some degree at some point is like, man, this is a weird thing that I'm doing today.
Yeah, for sure.
So as the outreach educator, I am the person that connects the public to what's happening in the wildlife through programs and presentations. So like Jess, every day is different, but sometimes I know ahead of time what my schedule is going to look like. But I present to small groups, large groups. I take people through the Wildlife Center. I post on the website. I interact on the moderated discussion on our website. I help out with taking care of our birds and our reptiles. And that's all for the purpose of being able to work with them so that I can present with them to groups about conservation and the Wildlife Center. It's a really cool job.
All right, Jess. So as we kind of talked about in this episode, in our hospital, we have a lot of really fancy equipment that you all use. We got our endoscopes, our microsurgery unit, our lead analyzer, our radiographs, and, of course, our online patient database. And I'm curious, in your role day to day as you said, an animal nurse, is there a couple of those pieces of equipment that you say you couldn't go without day to day?
Absolutely. So for me, in my role, I think that without a doubt, my favorite piece of equipment is the microscope, for sure. It lives in our in-house diagnostic lab, and that is basically what I use for all of our in-house diagnostics that we run. And I would say primarily we focus most of our diagnostics on hematology and fecal testing and like basic cytology. But in general, I would say that like 99% of the patients that come in our door have some kind of test that could be run that uses the microscope at some point, you know what I mean, as a component of that test. So if I had to get rid of all of the lab equipment that I have in the lab, the one piece of equipment that I would want to keep is the microscope, because it's basically essential for all of our in-house diagnostics. And I guess in terms of like other forms of technology that we use that don't necessarily, they're not like as prevalent in my day-to-day life, but like things that are certainly helpful and that, you know, have come a long way in terms of, you know, advancing, you know, veterinary medicine. I think that definitely digital radiography is a big thing. You know, back several years ago, you know, it didn't always used to be digital. So we would have to, you know, process film. There was like actual like film radiographs, just like there was in human medicine, where you'd have to like take the radiographs and then process the film. And it was like a very long and time intensive process essentially. And nowadays with digital radiographs, it's basically instant. And another really great thing about it is that when we're getting patients from referral centers that, you know, if they're a small animal practice that, you know, sometimes will take in wildlife, you know, if they perform radiographs, they have the ability to just send those digital copies of those x-rays to us, like by email. So we can review those cases and say, you know, oh, you know, like that fracture looks like it might be repairable, or no, it's in a really bad spot and the prognosis isn't that great. Which saves us a lot of time and energy, especially for the patient. You know, if we can say that, you know, the prognosis isn't that great for a patient and they don't have to travel 2 hours to come to our center, you know, that veterinarian can just provide humane euthanasia, then that's the best case scenario. And that saves time and energy for everyone involved. So that's a really nice feature. And then I would say lastly, like the big category of like technology that I use specifically and that I find the most helpful for my life as a tech is monitoring equipment. And this is kind of like a big umbrella category for a number of things. So monitoring equipment can basically be anything as simple as a stethoscope, which is super basic, and basically every technician and doctor has one available to them. And it allows us to listen to patients, auscult them, and listen to their heart and lung sounds. And, you know, if they're under anesthesia, we can certainly monitor changes in their vitals that way. And then it goes up to more advanced units that we have at the center, like our SurgiVet. And that's, you know, one of our more expensive pieces of equipment, but it has the capability to basically monitor a patient's blood pressure and their pulse oximetry, and it has an EKG adapter. And so it allows us to be a little bit more thorough in the vitals that we're monitoring. So for those longer procedures that we have to have patients that are under anesthesia, it's really great to have something like that so that we can, you know, have a better sense of what's going on.
And with all of that equipment and like all the diagnostics that go on at the center, one thing I always point out during our open house tours is that when we get in these wild patients, we don't often really know details about what's happening. Like, sure, maybe a rescuer can say, oh, I found this on the side of the road. But most of the time it's like some sort of injured wild animal. So it's an animal. It certainly can't tell us what's going on, what happened. They also don't have owners. So really, unlike dogs and cats, they don't have these owners who are like, oh, it's just like something is off behaviorally. So we're really kind of going in blind sometimes with these patients. And I know that a lot goes into like figuring out what's happening. And I guess I'm curious, like, how do you think the different diagnostic tools and the technologies that we have, how does that help you figure stuff out?
Certainly. I think that similarly, like to cat and dogs, you know, like any animal obviously can't speak for themselves, right? When they come to a clinic and, you know, there's something that's not right with the animal, they're sick or injured, we can't ask them and say, you know, like, what's wrong, and have them tell us the answer. But certainly the diagnostics play a huge role in that. And, you know, whether we basically, you know, when they come in and we do that physical assessment initially, and we see their clinical signs, performing those routine diagnostics or diagnostics just because of, you know, the clinical signs that they're presenting with definitely helps us to create a bigger picture of what's going on with that patient health-wise. So whether that's, you know, running a CBC to get more information about that patient's blood values, that might indicate whether or not they have some kind of inflammation or infection going on. And similarly with the lead test, that is a test that we routinely run eagles and vultures. And so, if that comes back positive, those are things that we can definitely use that information to alter the treatment plan for those animals, which is obviously the end goal. So, if these patients are coming in and they have a reasonable chance at being rehabilitated, the best course of action for them is to use those diagnostics to basically tailor their treatment plan to be, giving them the best chance of success that they're going to have. So whether that involves adding medications into their treatment plan or fluids, for example, if they're dehydrated, or chelation agents, if they do have lead intoxication, that all is usually, found out through the course of diagnostics. So that's kind of what the role of a lot of this technology is used for.
I wonder, is there any particular patient or situation that you can remember that sort of stands out as your favorite or most exciting kind of solved mystery moment when it comes to a patient?
One that happened within the last year, actually, we had two very similar cases within the last year of patients that had ingested some sort of like metallic opacity that we initially saw on radiographs. And the one that's sticking out in my mind was actually a great horned owl, which usually is not like a target species that we think about for lead intoxication. We don't routinely test them for lead unless, we're suspicious that maybe they have it, unless they're showing clinical signs. However, we did see on radiographs when we did the initial intake for this bird that there was some sort of like metal opacity in its upper GI tract. I can't remember if it was the ventriculus or the proventriculus, but there was these metal opacities, and then we did run a lead test, and it was very, very high. So we were able to confirm that those metal opacities were probably lead fragments from a bullet. And because it was still in the upper GI, we were able to lavage those fragments out. And then that patient, I think, went on to be, it was resolved of the lead because we were able to get it out of its system for the most part. I can't remember what the outcome for that patient was, if it was like released or anything like that. It was a while ago, but that's just a good example of like using a couple of different diagnostic tools to, make an observation and then confirm what you're suspecting, and then, make like a very good action plan in this case. It's not always as cut and dry as that, and we can't obviously always, fully resolve lead in those kind of cases if they haven't just freshly ingested it like that. But that's just a strange example that I saw because it was like so fresh, and it was just a very unique case.
Cool.
Yeah.
I guess same question for Lauren. I know as an educator, you're not in the hospital treating patients, but I feel like outreach gets to live vicariously because we take those stories and we share them. So sometimes we get to like experience that from remembering a special patient or like a procedure or something that, treatment process that happens.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's worth mentioning too that, sometimes I'm as intrigued about these things as like, maybe Jess would, or any of our veterinarians or any of our team members. And I am curious to know more about it, and then a lot of times Critter Nation or people will ask me the same exact question. And I'm like, yeah, I also wondered that. And here's the answer to that. Isn't that cool? Which I think is a really special experience as an educator, and also just like as a person in the world. Really awesome. But I think that I don't have a particular patient, but anytime I'm in the hospital and there's a turtle out and they're using the Doppler, that is by far my most favorite piece of equipment. It seems pretty simple, but essentially you can't use a stethoscope to listen to a turtle's heartbeat because they have that little shell that protects them. And so it would be too hard to hear it. So this little piece of equipment is essentially a speaker that's hooked up to some technology that I don't know the in and out of, but not even gonna pretend. But they basically like put this little sensor on their neck in between their little leggies and their head, and it listens to and then thus projects out of this speaker the sound of their blood flowing through their veins, which is just like super cool. And we use that in so many different ways, Jess, right? So like with living patients, and also, you know, like making sure that like, is this turtle still alive when it's admitted, you know, or has it already passed? But just because turtles are super mysterious little beings, and I think that piece of equipment's really cool. The other thing too is that I love vultures, like love vultures. And so the lead test is also really neat, because vultures are scavengers, and oftentimes they scavenge carcasses that have been shot with lead shot. We frequently run those tests on vultures, whether or not they're showing symptoms or not. So I think that's also really cool, because sometimes they have lead levels, but that's not part of the reason that they were admitted. And I think that's just really interesting information.
Yeah, yeah. What about you, Aaron, in your time at the center?
Yeah, in my time at the center. I also am going to talk about a favorite piece of equipment. I am a big fan of the laser for a number of reasons. One of which is because before I came here, so my sisters are physical therapists, and they laser their patients all the time. And I don't know what the science is behind it. I'm not smart enough to understand what's going on there, but I thought it was so interesting that, like, oh my gosh, you can do it to animals too, even though of course you can. It's the same basic principle, I'm assuming. Just cut me off if I'm wrong.
No, absolutely.
But I thought it was really neat to see them do the same kind of things you do on somebody who had, you know, a massive quad tear because they're a track athlete versus a raptor that went through some surgery. It's all about the same kind of procedure. I thought it was really neat. And the second favorite part about that is that it gives the vets an excuse to wear some really cool sunglasses that I'm sure they love to wear and that we all love to see them wear. So, you know, it's got benefits for everybody.
Fashion.
Exactly. What about you, Amanda? You got a favorite?
Gosh, it's been interesting being at the center so long and like seeing a lot of technology change, or like see us get new pieces of equipment. And it's really fun to like watch the vets and the techs geek out over like a new toy that they get to have. So yeah, there's a lot going on. But I guess one thing that does stick out in my head that's like solving a mystery sort of thing is I think it's really cool that our digital radiograph system, like not only do you see the whole image and like, you know, get to see all these little shapes and shadows in there. I mean, vets and techs can. I cannot. Like, I can see really obvious things, but reading radiographs is like an art. But I like that you can use a little measurement tool on the radiograph, so you can really like, oh, hey, there's a foreign body in that bird or whatever. And within the past year, sometime in the past year, we had, Lauren remembers this, we had a bald eagle come in, and it had a large bone in its stomach. Like, it was fine, it was just from dinner time. And we were able to look at it, and it was just like really cool to see on radiograph of like, oh, that eagle had a big old meal before it, however it was injured. And Dr. Ernesto was able to measure it and tell based on the image that it was kind of a sizable bone, like maybe like either raccoon or maybe cat sized. And you know, there are sadly a lot of outdoor cats, and like some of them are hit by cars and the eagles scavenge and all that. But I just thought that was the coolest thing, to be able to figure out like, ooh, hey, we think we know what you had for dinner yesterday.
Yeah, I remember hearing about like, oh wait, that's a really big bone. And I think it was a femur, right? Because it was like an enormously large bone, and then it was like from a larger animal, so it was just even more impressive. And yeah, that was really cool. That was one of those moments where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm geeking out.
Yeah, it's definitely fun stuff goes on, the fun discoveries that we all get to see and hear about. Well, Jess, I have to ask, in like coming in and learning how to use all of this different equipment, what piece of equipment did you find it most difficult to learn to use? Because I have to tell you, we gathered a bunch of B-roll footage for this episode, and I actually took the B-roll footage of Dr. Roberta coming in to teach some of our team, the microsurgery unit. And man, I was watching that and I was like, ooh, I'm glad I don't have to learn that, because I don't think I would be good at that.
I actually have fond memories of when Cara and I did our microsurgery training, because I was very anxious about it for whatever reason, because I was like, when am I ever going to be, like, I will never be using the microsurgery unit. If anything, I'll just be, running the anesthesia for whatever animal is, being operated on. But it was so fun getting to do that. It was like a day-long training opportunity, and I actually got to practice a lot of things, and it's actually easier than you think. So it was a lot of fun. And sadly, we don't really use the microsurgery unit like as much, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not, we don't use it a ton. We've used it a couple times in like vat orthopedic surgeries that we've tried to do, or amphibians, which has been fun, but it's not used a super ton. But I think the most challenging piece of equipment for me that has just been like weird getting used to, I guess, is the endoscope. And not so much because like I don't personally like actually use the endoscope. It's just that there's like a lot of pieces and parts that go into like setting it up and then disassembling it once it's just a very intimidating piece of equipment. So there's a lot of things and a lot of expensive parts. So it's just very intimidating to work with sometimes. And we don't use it that often. Usually it's for, a lot of times like actually like foreign bodies, like upper GI, like foreign bodies, most often like fish hooks, which we had a bald eagle, I think, that actually had a fish hook not that long ago that we used it on. Occasionally we'll use it to do like, we'll look in the air sacs of birds if we're concerned that maybe they have something like aspergillosis, which is a fungal infection that can affect their respiratory system, like their lungs and their air sacs. But that is definitely, I would say, probably the most like complicated and like scary piece of equipment I think that we have that is in my life anyways.
So the other big thing that technology helps us with is not just the at the center teaching and training, but of course technology has really expanded our footprint to reach people all around the world, certainly through our website and our critter cams, and the moderated discussion just kind of took us to a whole new level of being able to touch base on a daily basis with people around the world. And Lauren, you certainly do that on a daily basis and monitor that. What's your take on all that?
So I was trying to think, like, I could, like wrap off a bunch of different things of how I use technology in the outreach department. But I think that some of the most meaningful experiences for me were being able to use Skype in the classroom to talk to people literally all over the world. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, time zones inhibit us matching up with certain places just simply because, like, I can't do a program at 4 a.m. But I have talked to students in Greece. I've talked to students in South Africa, all over South America. So that's really cool. And even within the United States, I think that a lot of people tend to think that like other countries are really, really cool and like that's what you should highlight. But our ecosystems are so diverse across just the states. So, I could talk to somebody that lives in the desert across the country, and what I'm showing them is so vastly different from something that they're used to. And being able to share that is really cool. And, sharing Virginia wildlife is really awesome. But a lot of these species come with very core conservation messages. Like, if you take animals in as pets that are wild animals, you can endanger their species in the wild. And that's something that everybody can, wrap their heads around, or like that litter is harmful to animals in the environment. Like all of these different things, we apply it to Virginia wildlife, but really these concepts are universal, which I think is really cool. And the other thing is that I get to talk to people from all over the country through the critter cams every day. And I think that's really interesting to like have a little pen pal group, that I get to interact with every day. And just check in with. And, you know, we usually keep it mostly wildlife themed, but like for my birthday, everybody was like, what'd you do? And I was like, oh, friends all over the country, you know, and like, let me tell you how I spent my day in nature, you know? And yeah, so I think that especially with the pandemic now, to bring it back to 2020, virtual programming has been an enormous part of my job. And I was pretty excited to really delve into virtual programming because I think that it opens up a lot of opportunities for us. So I mentioned Skype in the classroom, but with us doing virtual programs on our own, I've been able to use a lot of my creativity to sort of develop those programs and make them a little bit different. So just about like an hour or two ago, I did a program with some friends that were, I say friends, but I don't know them, a small group that lives 2 hours away from us. So likely they wouldn't be able to come for a tour in person, you know, or it'd be a big trip for them. So I got to connect them with Buttercup, and we wandered around his enclosure and the vestibule, and they got to watch him eat a meal. And that's really special too, because even people who are close to us that can come visit us, they don't get that special like little insiders behind the scenes sort of footage and stuff like that. So I think that technology has played an enormous role in the outreach department.
I think it's really cool too that we have this kind of meeting between our outreach technology and our hospital veterinary technology when it comes to the hospital cam, that we're able to show the public, show the people who are interested in what's going on at the wildlife center, exactly what's happening every so often when we fire that thing up, and they can look into and see what people like Jess are doing on a day-to-day basis. I think it's a really unique opportunity that we have.
Yeah, and to be able to connect people literally with the inside of the wildlife center. That's a glimpse that they wouldn't be able to, you know, have as bystanders or, you know, just people of the public, because we are a working wildlife hospital. So that is really cool to be able to connect to them in that way. You're right.
Yeah, and we've certainly, in pandemic times, look for those extra connections since we can't really see a lot of people in person, and you know, a lot of people have not seen their families in a long time and all that. So it's been fun for me to not just see us connect with our wonderful online community and to be able to reach so many people, but it's been pretty cute to see a lot of family members tuning in, family and friends. So like those of us in outreach who are doing some of these live Facebook programs, you know, their friends and family are watching. I know like Aaron's whole crew out in Colorado are always like, hey, Aaron, hey, which is really cute. And like, but people's families are watching hospital cam because, you know, Jess's whole family, I don't know if they have, but they should log on and like watch you work and just have at it.
I know, I'm not even sure really if my mom has ever watched, but yeah, she's currently not doing anything else. So
what are we doing? Just call her up.
Yeah, she's gotta get on that.
I know.
Especially when you're wearing those fashion goggles for your laser treatments.
I know. My grandparents definitely have watched and they enjoy it thoroughly. So.
And then of course you can, I feel like some, I don't remember specifically, but like some staff members, mother or family member was like, you should really not wear that shirt to work or whatever. Like, so sometimes they could tell you how to do your job, maybe. I don't know.
The dangers of technology.
Exactly. Well, one thing I brought up in this episode was that's kind of like both exciting and maybe a little stressful, but it's where we live right now with technology, which is with ever-changing technology and new things on the horizon. We may be doing things or what we're doing in like a year or 2 years from now may not be things that have yet been invented, which is kind of cool and kind of scary and all that. But like, where do you see things in the future?
I honestly, oh God, I don't even know. It actually, the thought of that kind of scares me. But also is like mildly intriguing because I think that the direction that technology is going is a good one. Certainly. I think that especially right now, like no one could have foreseen, you know, a year ago that we would kind of all be in this situation where we're, you know, bound together by technology, but also like some of us feeling very isolated because we're all, you know, kind of staying at home and not trying to, you know, be out in the public. And I think that, you know, like Lauren was saying, a lot of the ways that we're already performing outreach and, you know, trying to educate the public and share what we're doing behind the scenes, we're already doing. And it just, I think that technology just evolves so quickly nowadays that it's so crazy that like you can't even really imagine like what will be like in 1 or 2 or 5 years from now. But I'm excited for whatever that might be. And whether that's like virtually sharing, I don't even know, like treatments every day, or I don't even know, having like, you know, a shadow day basically, like with as like a vet student or something, like virtually. However it ends up happening, I think that it would be exciting and definitely enriching if, you know, if things tend to trend in that direction as being more virtual rather than in person. So whatever it is, I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I think that the best way that I can answer this is that since I don't know what's going to happen with technology, I kind of hope that 3D cameras become a thing, like a webcam similar to our critter cams, but like people can swivel it to see like the whole enclosure instead of just from like the wall out. I think that that would be super cool. But things that I hope to continue, that I would love to cultivate and integrate into our regular life, that I think we've discovered is a huge part of outreach, is Facebook Live programs and live releases. I mean, I think those things they're so precious, because, you know, I can stick my phone into Albus and Severus's enclosure. There are rat snakes, and I can give them enrichment and talk about them, and people can like have a little view of like they were in their home with them while they explore a box, you know, and that's really special. And then the other thing is too is the live releases. I think that's really cool. I think that's something new that we've really embraced, and I hope that we continue. Of course, in non-pandemic times when we can have gatherings of people, which seems so foreign now, is our eagle releases, of course, right? We have those all the time. But I think that, you know, there's something special about releasing a turtle or releasing baby possums, you know, and just having that little moment. And, you know, because that's our whole goal. That's why we exist, is to put animals back into the wild and teach people about them. And if we can do that virtually, that's so cool. You know, because some people might be supporters that aren't nearby and they've never admitted a patient to us, but they can be part of that animal's journey.
Well, I think on that wonderful note, we can go ahead and end. This has been another episode of Untamed, Unfiltered. Lauren and Jess, thank you so much for coming. And thank you out there for viewing another episode. And we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3.